Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Connected on Relay FM. Connected is a weekly panel discussion on Apple and the impact of technology on our lives. This episode is brought to you by our fine sponsors. They are Igloo, Smile, Squarespace, and the Omni Group. My name is Myke Hurley, and I am joined by Mr. Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hey, Myke.
And Mr. Stephen Hackett.
Hey, boys.
How you doing?
Well,
welcome to Relay FM.
Turns out
it's so good to be back.
So we are back and we're better than ever. Connected.
The band is back together.
Yes.
This is like when the Beatles did, they got back together at one point, right?
Yes, sure.
I think we gotta ask Dr. Drang.
We're like 20 seconds in and Dr. Drang's already like punching the...
He's already upset, so we're off to a great start.
So Connected is the new name for the show that we do together, and it is part of Relay FM, which is the brand new podcast network that we've been working on for a while. So thank you to everybody who is here. Thank you for finding us in your podcast application of choice. I know the transition maybe wasn't as smooth as we originally intended, but technical things happen. And so I appreciate people coming and finding us and subscribing again to Connected. It is a pleasure to have you here, and we are very happy to be back together again. Now, in our true style, we decided that we would want to start with a bit of a bang today, so we're going to do a very special episode talking about the iPod. And we're going to kind of look at the history of a few different iPod models, ones that we consider to be kind of monumental. As you can imagine, we all have thoughts on like the old, the not so old, and the new, because that's kind of how we work.
Spoiler alert, there are no new iPods.
and guess which one Stephen took the most notes on?
Hey,
buddy.
We were planning this, and it just kind of fell to me to do the oldest one. Not a big surprise, right? I'm ancient.
Well, I mean, at least it's not vinyl.
You can't make those jokes anymore.
Yeah,
Casey's part of the network now.
Yeah. So if he quits, we're in trouble.
We are. We're going to go down.
So 2001. So let's set the stage. 2001, the first iPod introduction. This was a long time ago. There's references in this keynote to how confusing VHS players are to use. Like, it's funny, right? Like, you guys were like 8 and 9 years old, right?
I do remember VHS. I'm not that young. I think for some reason you think I'm like 15.
You had a birthday this past week.
Yeah, but I'm not 15.
2 weeks ago now. You're 16 now. Congratulations.
No, I'm 17. Come on.
So 2001, obviously the Mac is sort of just easing into its newfound glory. The iMac's been out for 2 years. The Titanium PowerBook, some of these machines. It's kind of that era. And Jobs starts out with a recap of the digital hub strategy, which was really looking back 10 years later, 15 years later, obviously an inspired thought process that, hey, you have your Mac and you deal with photos and music and videos, and the Mac is going to be the hub for all those spokes. So your video, you import into your Mac, you make a movie, you export it out, you bring your music in, you can play it, you can take it out on your iPod, as we see today. You have photos, you take them with a digital camera, load them into iPhoto, and then you can share them on the web or have a book printed or that sort of thing. So a very, really in hindsight, a very cohesive strategy to dealing with media. And it was really the bread and butter of the Mac for a long time in the professional space, and this brought it down to the consumer level. And they talk about iMovie 2, iDVD, which of course is now dead, and iTunes 2. And they demo all this stuff, right? Like the iMovie demo is kind of painful, right?
I love it because it's like, oh, an iMovie, people love iMovie so much that they send us in these home videos all the time. And here is a home video from a customer. And it's like
so weird.
Like a child running around a living room.
I love it when he says that you can play the video in reverse. So the child works backwards. It's super weird.
Why do you
this toddler going on backwards on the screen?
That's fine.
I just love that there clearly wasn't the same like budget then as Apple has for these sorts of videos now, like when they do these like demos, because it's like why would you do this? It's just so strange. This is the first in a line of very strange things that occur in the original iPod introduction.
Yeah. Now like they show a product demo and it's like handsome people surfboarding, but clearly that budget, like it's so funny to me. It's so, I mean, I see why they did it. They wanted to connect to people who'd be using it, but it's pretty funny.
I do love the way, Stephen, that you refer to the digital hub strategy as a very cohesive strategy, because I believe the opposite is that it was a cohesive strategy for a very fragmented media world, because people were taking pictures with a camera, they were taking videos with another device, they were listening to music with another device, and they were using a computer to keep it all together. So there was this contrast between the two, and the fact that Steve Jobs and Apple came up with these ideas, I believe in looking back at these years before the smartphones, and the consolidation of all the media capabilities of the devices that we have, is so interesting to see how a company was trying to follow this vision, because they believe that it was the way of the future in a way. And so maybe iDVD and all this stuff is kind of, it's weird now, right? Because, I mean, what's the appeal of making a DVD with a clickable menu? And Steve Jobs was so excited to show the iDVD interface. But back then, I guess it was pretty genius.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it reminds me of that. There's a photo floating around. Maybe we can find it for the show notes, but of like a backpack of like from like 2002 with like a PowerBook and like a HD camcorder, and like now it's like it's all just in your phone, and you can do a lot of this on your phone now, right? Like you can fire up iMovie and make a little clip, and it's definitely collapsed in on itself to kind of just a core device, but it definitely is interesting, and it was so key to like getting families to buy a Mac, because you could put like we were saying about the demo video, make a video of your kid, send it to your grandparents, and they're confused why little Johnny is walking backwards. But it's interesting along these lines. Jobs introduces the iPod, and sort of in a framework of like a camera doesn't know about iPhoto, and the iPhoto doesn't really know about a camera. Like it can import, but it doesn't really know about it. And they said that the iPod, that with music, they were going to change that. They were going to have a device that the iApps, as they used to call them, knew about.
I love iApps.
I was going to say Stephen loves the word iApps for sure.
That's
I
not
think
true
I
at
think
all.
it's fantastic. I just love the iApps, and he keeps saying it like the iApps, and I have no recollection of them being called this.
This is like when people call the iPod Touch the iTouch.
Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started. Or the ridiculous things that Casey calls his,
Retina Pad Mini and the
Oh
the
my God.
Polybook. I cannot forgive those.
We
Yes.
are gonna talk about the iTouch later on this episode.
Federico, you're fine.
Can I say
I-
iTouch?
I actually have in our sort of like our future topics list for analog. I have to berate him about his use of these words.
As co-founder of Relay, I nominate myself to be a guest on that show because I want to destroy him.
Just pop in, say them, and leave.
Yes. Yeah. So Mike, before we get to the iPod,
Yeah.
let's talk about somebody awesome.
Okay, let's do that. Let's talk about Igloo. Now, Igloo are our first sponsor for this week, and they're really helping us get Connected and Relay FM off the ground. Igloo is an intranet you'll actually like. Anyone that's worked in a corporate environment like me knows just how horrible and painful intranets can be. In my time inside the corporate world, I've experienced quite a few of these products and all the different projects that people have tried to put through to me on these sort of things. And to be honest, they all absolutely suck. But Igloo is awesome. It's built with actual human beings in mind. It's easy to use, and it has cloud apps like shared calendars, Twitter-like microblogs, and file sharing to basically bring the new internet in to intranets. It works on your laptop, your tablet, or your phone. So whether your team is working remotely, whether they're sitting next to you, whether on the other side of the hallway, you're going to have the right tools to communicate and collaborate as you grow as a team. Now, this sort of stuff sounds really simple, like the fact that you can use it on your laptop, tablet, or phone. But in this world, this is huge. It gives you the flexibility to get your work done however you want. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to try and grab just that laptop or just that phone. You can use any of your devices wherever you want. Igloo is truly building a product that I see as like built for today and for the future. It's not built like it's still 1997. Everything that you need is built right into Igloo. There's no need to manage multiple cloud apps or different services, and everything on Igloo's platform is social. So as you grow, coordinating people and projects becomes even more simple. And they have loads of social features that you're used to, like comments and the ability to like stuff. It has all the social conventions that you use every day. Everything in Igloo is widget-based and drag and drop, so it's super easy to brand and configure your Igloo. And Igloo makes use of responsive web design, so it looks fantastic on all the devices that you use. A couple of weeks ago, I had a great tour of Igloo myself. Now, this is something that all new Igloo customers get the opportunity to have. It's like a full product demo, in which someone from the awesome team at Igloo can give you a real run-through of the product and answer any questions that you may have. I was blown away, not just by Igloo, but by the care and attention of the team. They really seem to care about Igloo. I know it sounds crazy, but they love their product. The Igloo website is built on top of Igloo itself. Like the website, so igloosoftware.com, is built on top of Igloo. They dog food their product. They believe in it. Something that I really loved from the demo that I had with the guys at Igloo is that inside of a company, people can customize their own homepage. So as a user, if we had the Relay FM Igloo, as a user of that, I could have quick access by dragging and dropping different widgets in, customize my own homepage. So if I want to get to this and this and this really easily, it's all there in front of me. One last thing, Igloo's social intranet tour is stopping in London, San Francisco, and New York over the next 2 months. If you want to go along and see Igloo and meet the people, go to igloosoftware.com/London for more details. But the very best thing of all, is that Igloo is free to use for up to 10 people. You can sign up at igloosoftware.com/connected and get started today. Thanks so much to Igloo for helping us launch Relay FM and for supporting this show. So go show your support for us and them by going to igloosoftware.com/connected.
So during the presentation of the original iPod, at one point Steve Jobs starts explaining why they decided to address the music market. And if it's okay with you guys, I would like to play a clip.
Now, why music? Well, we love music, and it's always good to do something you love.
So I know, Stephen, that you love this quote too, and the fact that it's the kind of message that Apple is still using in a way. The fact that they love music and that the music is in Apple's DNA, and it's always good to do something that you love, because if you love what you're doing, you can have better results. And even with the acquisition of Beats Music and with the various releases of iTunes and all the music announcements in the past few years, we've always seen all this care that Apple puts in when it comes to music. And I remember, for instance, when the Beatles were released on iTunes, Apple had a full-on event on their website and the press release. So music is very much an Apple thing. And I also wanted to kind of highlight when Steve Jobs says that music is for everyone and everybody gets music. That I've always thought that was true, because I mean, who doesn't like music, right? Who doesn't like a good song? It turns out that according to modern research, there are some people who are physically not capable of enjoying music, and that's an actual condition. And I have a link to an article from The Verge. So technically, music is not for everyone, but I guess in general, everybody loves music. So of course, it makes sense for Apple, and it makes sense for Steve Jobs, I guess, to go on and enter the mobile device market with a music player.
Yeah, and he kind of opens things up by explaining the landscape of these devices. You know, it's a very Apple thing to do of, hey, we're going to make a smartphone, look at all these terrible smartphones, and then builds the case of how his is better. And they do the same thing here. And what the bit that really jumped out at me was like the price and size of the current players. And I did not have an MP3 player before my first iPod, but I know a lot of people did. And the stats that Apple that Jobs shared was like CDs were about $5 a song, flash players were about $10 a song, and a hard disk jukebox player, as he called it, which is like a mouthful. And that was about 30 cents a song. And so, Jobs kind of built the case that, these hard disk based, hard drive based players might be more expensive, but you get more bang for your buck. And you see that thread as he continues, which is pretty interesting.
I love this simple table that Steve Jobs shows on the screen, because it really shows you the kind of thinking that went into the iPod, and in general, I guess, into Apple's design process, because is showing a CD player and all these other dedicated devices, and instead he says we're going after the hard drive market because we want to offer basically a hard drive that plays music. So it gets you thinking, oh God, is Apple going to release a new hard drive just for music? And then they surprise you because it's technically a hard drive, a very portable one, but it's the kind of, you can see in this simple chart that the kind of process that goes into making this kind of product. And we would see later with the iPhone, Apple really likes all these comparisons, right? Taking a look at the competition and showing you bad smartphones and then showing you the actual product. And I just love the way that he says hard disk based jukebox player. I think that they should have called the iPod the jukebox player with the hard disk. Myke, I know, Myke, that you wanted to talk about the iPod name.
As I'm watching this, I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of people in 2001 and trying to understand the product launch. And as I'm doing it, I'm trying to think to myself, why did they call this the iPod? Like, there are so many names that kind of could have made sense in this scenario. Like, I was thinking of maybe some, like, I don't know, like iTrack or like iTunes or iBeat, just something music related, right? I mean, the iPhone is the phone, the iPad, I mean, you can kind of get it like it's like a tablet, like a touchpad, like it's like a, you can see that. But I still, and I don't know if I'm missing something, but to this day, I still can't understand why it's called the iPod.
I think for Apple it was because it was like a sci-fi thing, because the pod was like a little like a shuttle pod in Star Trek or something. I think Stephen knows more than me here.
Yes, I mean it's sort of a nerdy name, like
yeah. Because from my video game background, the pod is basically like Myke, do you know the old like 2D shooter games where you have to move like a little spaceship to shoot stuff? And there was I think it was Gradius, this game where you had a pod, which is like an extension of the main spaceship. So right. I'm guessing from this perspective, you can consider the iPod like an extension of yourself, but that plays music. It's just the device becomes part of your lifestyle. And so I've always considered knowing this pod thing from video games. I've always seen the iPod name as the iPod is an extension of me, and I always carry the iPod with me because I always want to listen to music. And from this perspective, I was also looking at the original marketing of the iPod with the black white on black silhouettes and the people dancing and jumping. You can see that the iPod is represented and is visualized as an extension in the marketing campaigns. So that was my idea. And then I was reading about the iPod name, and I'm pretty sure that I read this Star Trek reference about the shuttle pod. And so Steve Jobs liked the name, and they used the iPod name.
Yeah, and they kind of share the name, and then they get to the big statement of 1,000 songs in your pocket. And And I mean, that's a line that really, like, we'll see in the next 5 hours of the show. Like, that line keeps coming back. And again, tying it back to the top of, there's these other players, but you can't put your music library on them. A flash-based player is more or less a couple of CDs. Like, it was a whole new approach of, hey, because we have a hard drive, you can put all of your music on this. And because you can do that, to Federico's point, it is an extension. It is like you're taking your whole music, which a lot of people identify with music, and that's how people self-identify of, hey, I'm this fan of this band, I'm a fan of this group. I followed Fish on tour for 4 years. It's a very personal thing, and so to have all of that with you in a device that you can put in your pocket was huge. And he kind of chucks and jives a little bit about CDs, as you can hear in this next clip.
This is huge. How many times have you gone on the road with a CD player and said, oh God, the CD, I didn't bring a CD I wanted to listen to? To have your whole music library with you at all times is a quantum leap in listening to music. The coolest thing about iPod is that your entire music library fits in your pocket. Okay? You can take your whole music library with you right in your pocket. Never before possible. So that's iPod.
Which I just find really funny in 2014. Like, rifling through your car to put a CD player in your dashboard seems incredibly dangerous. But it's so.
You find it funny. I still have a CD player in my car.
So do I. I just bought a brand new car when we were on break, and like brand new car ordered from the factory. I can put a CD player in it. I can put a CD in it. It's got a CD player. It's crazy.
You guys need 6 CD changes. That's what you need.
Yeah, I don't have that.
And you need the car.
Yeah.
I only own CD players. I don't own cars. So
does each like little seat on the tube have a built-in CD player?
Yes.
Perfect.
God, no, it's vinyl. You just put an LP in there.
So I don't think you know how LPs work. I really think like all of this together is like Jobs. Like Jobs is on fire in this keynote. It's not as good as Jobs of the iPhone keynote. I think we're in agreement that that's his best performance. But I would argue this might be his second best. I like the humor. I like the demo that we're going to talk about is really good.
It's really different though. Like the whole setting is different. So in case you haven't watched the video, they're like, I assume they're in the town hall.
Yes. And
so it's a very intimate setting. Everyone's kind of really close to Steve. There's, I think it's just press.
It's just press.
And this is a time when at this time kind of nobody really cared. Like what they had to say.
There's no fist pump guy here.
Yeah.
Like it's a pretty subdued crowd.
I saw Jason Snell.
Oh, was he power sliding?
No, he was sitting down, but
I did not see Jason. What?
I did see Jason. I'm gonna have a screenshot.
Yeah.
Yes.
I need that.
Yes. We'll put him in the show notes. Myke, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Where are show notes for our newfangled show?
Just go to relay.fm/connected/1.
Perfect. I assume that's the URL. I should know the URL structure, but
you designed it, so
hey. So Jobs moves into the big features, right? Like this is an Apple presentation, right? 3 big features. The first one being all about the portability. That this is ultra portable, good battery life, 10 hours of battery life. He kind of makes a joke that the battery is better than what they put in their laptops at the time.
He mentions one thing. He says 20-minute skip protection. What does that actually really mean?
Oh, you don't know what's the shock protection?
No, I know what it does, but how can it be 20 minutes? I assume it's like caching the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's like buffering. Yeah.
So, because I guess it could also do it with shuffle, right? Because it knows what's going to be there.
Anyway, so shuffle it would my understanding was it would preload. And so they did it so you could shake the thing for 20 minutes. I mean, you'd probably damage the hard drive. But in destroying your device, the music wouldn't skip.
Right. So it's not
It's
like
an
a rolling
upside.
20 minutes. If you run from one in 20 minutes, you're screwed.
I'm sure it's rolling.
Right, so it's infinite skip protection. I don't actually. Do you know what? Let's move on because I'm going to start getting email about this. I
Yeah.
don't want
So a couple of just quick tech specs because that's sort of my job. Firewire for charging its sync. A CD would copy in 5 to 10 seconds, which when he does the demo, like you can tell it's like mind-blowingly fast.
No, but it's the worst demo ever. Are we at
He
that
syncs
point yet?
an entire library.
And it's like minutes. And they're just sitting there in
It's
silence.
just complete silence.
Like, so he's like, okay, we're now going to copy like 1,000 songs. I'm jumping ahead here. I know I've got this in my notes somewhere. He like copies like a few hundred songs and it takes like 5 minutes. And everyone just has to sit and wait. And he's like, oh,
Yeah.
look how fast this is. And I said,
Yeah.
yep. He's like, look how quick this is. That's 20 more songs. I'm like, oh my God, Steve, you're killing me.
He has
What
an
happened?
audience of, I guess, at least a couple of dozen people just looking at a screen at a progress bar and just contemplating iTunes sync, which just watching this thing was both creepy and amusing because there are people just waiting for iTunes to finish.
It's
Yeah.
just weird. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's not the worst demo.
Yeah, it's a little look into how it is every time I sync my iPod today.
You just sit
Well,
there and
well,
watch.
remember, like it's just USB 1.1 at this point, so a CD would take like 5 minutes on USB, so it was. And remember, the audience is technical journalists, right? Like I'm sure Jason Snell was super excited about this. Not to put words in his mouth, but I bet he was super excited about this.
We could get. I hope we get some actual follow up from Jason in this scenario.
Yeah. So, so about 20 minutes in, he starts talking about the product itself. It's the size of a deck of cards, which I don't know. So I actually dug up. A friend of mine's got a second gen iPod, which is basically the same. The click wheel's a little different. And it is humongous today, but it really is like the size of a deck of like casino cards. It's unbelievable. There's actually like a quote from Jobs. It has Apple design. Like, what does that mean? Like, it's
somebody
white
else
and
didn't
plastic.
design it. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought HP designed that one.
Yeah.
I love when he says it's lighter than most cell phones, because, and then later he shows like a comparison with the Motorola. What was that? I guess it's years later. With
yeah,
the
the
Razr,
rocker.
Yeah,
right?
you're thinking of the.
You
Razr.
always like to make comparisons with cell phones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I guess at this point in 2001, which kind of cell phones do we have? It's like the huge Nokia phones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty terrible ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. He reveals it about 20 minutes in.
Boom. That's iPod. I happen to have one right here in my pocket, matter of fact. There it is, right there.
So it's the idea again, all of your music library in your front pocket. I mean, I remember this happening. I was already a Mac user, but not like hardcore. And I remember like when this news broke, I remember reading about it on like Mac, like in Macworld. Like, this seems impossible. Like, it really seemed like something from the future, and it's pretty great.
So here's a bit that's from the past, and this might be one of my favorite moments in the worst possible way.
But iPod's even more than music, because we've got a 5 gigabyte hard drive in it, and we've got FireWire, and so iPod is also a FireWire hard drive. You can actually use it as a FireWire hard drive and drag your documents, your photos, whatever else, right alongside your music on it, and use it to transport those to another computer.
So we now know that it's more than a music player. It's also a FireWire hard drive. I think the idea of...
Whatever, dude. I loved that feature.
I'm sure you did. But it's like, oh my God, what is this? How is this like a big selling point? You can drag your documents and photos and take them to another computer.
That's amazing.
Because it's a FireWire hard drive, it's also a FireWire hard drive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You gotta understand, Mike, that for some people, this idea of transferring files is still new.
Oh, I remember my iPod Photo and enabling what was it, something disk mode?
Disk mode.
Yeah,
it was like enable disk mode was the checkbox.
I was able to put my coursework on it and take it to college.
Yeah,
it was cool, but to think it's that was a selling point, and that just makes me so sad.
My dad just learned how to use a USB thumb drive a few days ago. So I guess there's a market for people who don't know how computers work.
Were you involved in this in any way?
I was, yeah. Basically, he asked me if it was possible to move a document he wrote on his computer to another person's computer.
Nope.
And I was pretty surprised because I couldn't understand whether he was serious or not. And it turns out he was really serious. And so I explained the concept of a USB thumb drive, and he was like, "Do you have one?" And of course I had some back in my place, and he was so happy when the other person received the document through the USB thumb drive, and he was really excited. So
Yeah.
I guess I could probably just find my old iPod Classic and just explain that's a really big hard drive. And maybe he will be excited.
Yeah, full of rap music. There's actually, I put a link in the show notes for OS X Panther. There was a rumor, I think there was actually some documentation from Apple that they were going to allow iPod users to sync their home folders over. So I could have my entire home folder on my iPod. I could go to Mike's house, plug my iPod in, and log into that user.
That just sounds such
It
a
never
bad
saw
idea.
light of day, and I think the 1.8-inch hard drives that Apple continues to use, that's what's in my iPod Classic that I maybe just bought 3 months ago. Those hard drives are really slow, and so I think the performance alone is what killed that feature. But to have it in your to have it in your bag, to have it in your pocket as an emergency backup, I mean, why not, right? It's just a checkbox. It's it's funny now, but I think it was useful for a lot of people.
So let's take our second break for this week's episode to thank our next sponsor, and that is the fantastic people over at Smile. And today I want to talk to you about Text Expander. If you ever type the same sentences, phrases, or even words on a regular basis, then you need Text Expander in your life. Text Expander saves you time and effort by expanding short abbreviations into frequently used texts, maybe even pictures, if you want to do that. Whether it's simple, something like an email signature, or maybe it's several paragraphs of a standard response that you send frequently, you're going to love how easy it is to use Text Expander to avoid typing the same thing over and over. Maybe you have to frequently fill in forms with the same information. Well, you can make this super simple by creating a fill-in snippet. So in just a couple of keystrokes, you can fill in a form with multiple fields that may have taken you minutes to complete before. This just shows some of the incredible power that you can have with Text Expander. You can, once you've been setting up all of your snippets and you've got all your words, your phrases, the forms that you fill in all ready, you can sync all of these snippets via Dropbox and use them on multiple devices, and even with Text Expander Touch on iOS. This means that all of your snippets are going to stay in sync on all of your devices. You can access your Text Expander snippets inside Smile's iOS app or enable Text Expander in the 60 plus apps in the store that have integrated snippets. Many of these are some of our favorite applications like Omni Outliner 2, Day One, Fantastic How To, Drafts, Launch Center Pro, Editorial, and many, many more. They all integrate with Text Expander Touch on iOS. Personally, I adore Text Expander. I have a bunch of words and phrases that I type so often, like all the sponsor information for these shows, the show names, the URLs, and all that sort of stuff, and I have snippets for all of them. I wouldn't know what I would do without Text Expander now. Every time I hear that little bloop sound it makes when I'm expanding a snippet, I know I've done something awesome. It's one of the first apps I install on all of my devices. It's just part of what makes my Mac work properly. Without it, I'm totally lost. Just typing random characters all over the place, hoping that I'll be saving time. I'm just like, CCO, nothing happens. I'm like, oh, what's happening? So it's terrible when I'm at work. On the Windows machines, makes me very sad. You can learn more about Text Expander at smilesoftware.com/connected. You're also going to see a fantastic video by our friend David Sparks telling you even more about what Text Expander can do. So go to smilesoftware.com/connected, and Text Expander Touch is available on the App Store.
1,000 songs in your pocket. We think this is a major, major breakthrough.
Yeah, so like we talked about a second ago, a pretty subdued reaction to what in hindsight becomes a very important piece of marketing. And again, like we've been talking about, a really important factor in the iPod success. No fist pump guy, nobody screaming and clapping. But yeah, I have to say, out of all of Apple's marketing over the last 10, 15 years, like 1,000 songs in your pocket, pretty dang good. Maybe,
Yeah.
if not the best, definitely in the top 2 or 3 lines. One of the few that I can remember, honestly, offhand. Like, that's a phrase that if you asked me what the iPod marketing line was, ladies, that would be one. Like, that's one that I remember.
It's one of those marketing lines that's so good, it could have only been so good by accident. Like, you couldn't have made something this fantastic and like assume it to last you for the next X amount of years. Like, it's just such a good line that just takes on its own personality and runs with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they kind of move away from storage and portability and moving into talking about how easy it is to use. So like we said at the top of the show, there's a joke about VCRs. Myke, you put in the note, or I think Federico, you put in the notes in all capital letters, Apple's legendary ease of use.
Yeah, that's the actual description that they use in the presentation. Legendary ease of use.
Yeah.
Well, our second major breakthrough is we have applied Apple's legendary ease of use to iPod.
It's not just regular. It's not normal ease of use. This is legendary, guys.
Yes.
Yeah. And so they start talking about the interface. The demo is actually really pretty clever. If you watch the video, the iPod is on a desk and there's a camera straight above it, like they do with the iPhone and things later. So you see like Jobs' like finger going around the wheel, and he makes a joke about how he chews his fingernails, which I found like a really like kind of charming comment in the keynote. Like he made a joke about maybe I should have a hand model up here, but I don't know, something about that really felt nice to hear.
And here we are. So you can see my finger there. I bite my fingernails, so should have had a finger artist.
So they show the scroll wheel and how it's very easy to scroll and click through playlist artists and albums. He makes a big point about the clicker, the actual little sound effect that tick, 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 tick as you go around. I think that's really important because it really gave feedback to what was happening. And if you watch the video, or if you have ever spent any time with an iPod with the click turned on, it is a 1-to-1 feedback mechanism on, the highlight moves down the screen and I get a click. It's a very positive reinforcement that this sort of device, you're moving your thumb around in a circle, that it's doing what it's supposed to do.
I mean, we still have it today. We have the clicky iPhone keyboard. Like it continues. Like I feel like that there is a way of, those two things bouncing together.
I didn't know that the original scroll wheel actually moved.
It did. So
I always thought that the click wheel was always the same, like a touch click wheel.
Yeah. The second gen, so the one that my friend has is solid state, but the first one is a mechanical piece that actually spins around.
That's not as legendary. I feel.
So I was reading a bunch of articles about the history of the iPod, and so Schiller's team came up with the idea of the scroll wheel because basically the conception of the iPod happened rather quickly when Apple brought in Tony Fadell from, I guess he was working at Philips, or he had worked at Philips. Anyway, they brought in Tony Fadell and they gave him the job to basically in 6 weeks to came up with a concept for the iPod, and the team of Phil Schiller came up with the idea of the scroll wheel, which Steve Jobs liked a lot. And as for the software, I didn't know that the original iPod and other iPods as well, they were using basically a licensed software that Apple tweaked to get the design and the interactions right. Actually, they used a bunch of different licensed programs to run the software on the iPod, to handle the connection with iTunes. And I thought that all the software was made by Apple, which wasn't. So that
Apple's
was a surprise.
legendarily licensed ease of use.
Yeah.
Oh.
In some cases. So I was wondering if you guys think that the way that the iPod was organized, browsing music by playlists or songs or artists, whether you think that basically that was Steve Jobs' taste applied to music organization. Because we always hear these stories about how Steve Jobs was a great, music fan, and he was always listening to the Beatles and Bob Dylan and other artists. And when I watched this demo, when I watched this video, more than any other products, I see Jobs' taste applied to every aspect of the iPod.
Yeah, I think so. I think the way he talks about it is a very personal thing, and I definitely see, you can take a step from here and look at the other iPods. I actually just watched the keynote where they introduced the iMac G5 with EyeSight in front row, and he talks about the Apple remote, that, hey, there's like 6 buttons on our remote, and the Windows Media remotes have like 81 buttons. And he kind of, it's that same sort of idea, like that it's simple, but it's powerful.
One last cool little fact before we move on. At one point during the demo, he plays basically a Bach prelude performed by Yo-Yo Ma. And this is the same song that Apple would use as a tribute to Steve Jobs after his death. And I have a link in the show notes that I wrote up on Mac Stories a couple of years ago. Basically, this Yo-Yo Ma song is more accurate because it's arranged in a different way, in the same way that they used to play the cello back in Baroque times. And Steve Jobs was a huge Yo-Yo Ma fan, and we can see this little quick demo of a Yo-Yo Ma song in the original iPod announcement.
Yeah. So he wraps up the iPod announcement talking about iTunes, that you can, like we talked about, you can sync the whole library over. There's a really painful demo, and that's what the first ad is about, actually, which I liked, but I don't think Myke did.
So this is the ad with the dancing guy. I cannot abide that ad. I do not like it at all. It kind of drives me crazy. It's just seems like bad marketing. It's not fun. It's like dumb. Like the ads that come after it, like the silhouette ads, are fantastic, but this ad I'm not a big fan of.
Yeah, it gives the idea that you can keep playing a song at the same position when you pick up your iPod. But iTunes didn't sync playback position, so the ad is technically wrong. It's just a thing that I noticed.
I'm not sure that's accurate. I don't remember. I feel like at some point it did. I don't know. Anyways, I like the ad because it gets to the very heart of the product. That, hey, you have music that's like locked away on your computer, but you can stick it in your pocket and like dance around your apartment and then go to work with it. But it's not the only video they showed. Apple, they don't really do this anymore. I mean, they do, but they're shorter. Apple used to have like these 8-minute product videos where they would have like talking heads of, so like when they did like a Power Mac G4, they would have like the Apple guys. They'd have a guy from Adobe. They'd have a guy from Pixar saying, hey, this machine does X, Y, Z, and really quickly. For the iPod, though, they had a bunch of musicians on it, and it's kind of interesting.
So they have Moby. They have Steve Harwell from Smash Mouth.
Hey now, you're an all-star.
Yes.
Who I'd forgotten existed.
I forgot Smash Mouth was a thing.
And they have Seal as well. And I just love the way that they talk about the iPod is just so strange. Like Steve Harwell's like, I'm gonna get my girlfriend one. I'm like, I don't understand. What are you doing?
He just needed to let people know he had a girlfriend.
Yeah. And I mean, this guy is not even a gentleman because he doesn't want to give his iPod to his girlfriend. It's
That's a
just
good point.
yeah. This Moby is confused. He's really skeptical as to how technology works.
Yeah,
But
it's
he just likes the iPod.
I didn't know I could play music on a device. Like it's kind of sad. It's pretty interesting. But time marches on, and so should we. So I think maybe we should move on from the original iPod and take a step closer to the present. That sound good?
That sounds
Can
like
we
a
can
great
we
idea.
just close? Can we just close with the famous quote from Slashdot?
Yes.
No wireless, less space than a Nomad. Lame.
What's a Nomad?
The music player.
Yeah, it's in the show notes. There was a music player by Creative called the Nomad, which is actually not a bad name for like a portable device, but a terrible product. So,
And actually, Creative sued Apple over a patent for organizing files to playback through the music player, and Apple settled for $100 million and allowed Creative to make accessories with the Made for iPod program. Yeah.
today I learned. So, 2004, I'm going to fast forward a couple years. What we view as the next landmark iPod is the iPod Mini. At this point, the iPod had 31% of the market share for portable media players. And Apple wanted to go up against the Flash players, which at this point could hold 30 to 60 songs. And Jobs sort of attacked this by introducing a new member of the family.
Well, we are going to introduce the second member of the iPod family today to go after these guys. And it's called the iPod Mini.
It's interesting. In that clip, unlike the one before, the Jason Snell's excited at this one, and there's like clapping. I don't think there's a fist pump guy, but people are definitely excited.
Well, I think because at this point people had bought into the iPod as a thing, and like for there to be a new product, it's been a few years. The iPod's gained some traction. At this point, it's on Windows, right, as well.
Yes.
So it's starting to gain leverage. It's also been revved by this point as well, hasn't it? It doesn't have those physical scrolling.
Yeah, at this point, I think we're up to the third gen that had the scroll wheel and then the 4 buttons across the top that were backlit in red, which is about the same time. That was my first iPod.
I didn't like the red backlighting.
I think I have sentimental attachment because it was my first one, but objectively, it's sort of a terrible iPod. But the Mini is interesting because Jobs says, look, we're going after the Flash players, but we're going to do it with a hard drive based iPod. The iPod Mini had a hard drive. And there's a little screen cap in our show notes where
it's low resolution because the video, guys. There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, it's Mike's really good at screenshots. Mike chats for images. The iPod Mini, 4 gig hard drive, so 1,000 songs, and the Syracusa, the Syracusian listeners might notice, hey, the first iPod was 5 gigs and had 1,000 songs in your pocket. This one is 4 gigs and the same number of songs. Well, Apple kind of did some hand-wavy stuff and said, well, compression's gotten better, which was sort of true.
Are they at AAC at this point?
You'd think I would know that. I don't. Maybe.
Oh.
I think so.
Are you accidentally going to let set on fire now?
I know. Well, you can email us at mike@relay.fm.
Mm-hmm.
So $249, so a little more expensive than some of these Flash players, but
yeah,
I love the way Jobs spins it.
It's that great idea. It's like it's 16 times more storage, 16 times more songs. It's half the thickness, and it's only $50 more.
Yeah, it says the exact quote is,
You get 940 more songs for $50.
And it says it's the best $50 you'll ever spend.
ever in all of life.
Yeah.
Mike, this was your first iPod, right?
It was my first iPod. I was one of the people that was like, oh, I don't understand what an iPod's for. Like the original iPod, I was like, I don't get it. And then as soon as the iPod Mini came out, I was like, yeah, I get it. Because it was kind of like cool and it looked good. Now, I've told this story before, but like I went to buy one and they only had green and pink. For some reason, I really didn't want green, so I had a pink iPod Mini.
It's fine.
But I think like if you look at this sort of chart and the one that's in the show notes, you can see it's such a huge leap, and you can kind of see how when you look at like what was available at the time, how much it cost. You could get 60 songs on something that cost you $200, or for $250 you could get 1,000. You can see how the iPod Mini ended up making such a massive impact, and I personally believe, and I'd like to believe I'm not the only person in this thinking, that the iPod Mini as a product was a huge turning point for Apple. Like, it got people of my age at the time interested in them as a company. Like, the iPod Mini was my first Apple product. And I knew that from the iPod Mini, I then started to get more interested in all of technology and in Apple. And then my sort of love affair of Apple went on from there. I got like all the new iPod revisions in the same way that we get iPhones and iPads now. Then I sort of got into the Mac. But the iPod Mini became like a fashion statement. As well as a way for me to discover new music. And it was like that for people like my peers at the time, and people my age in school. We loved that we had these devices that looked really cool and they could put all our music on them. And it kind of coincided with this rise in music piracy, like in my generation. So it became like a device that was super important to me because I was able to like listen to the music I was discovering. It also turned me on to Apple products, and it was like this sort of transitionary product in my lifetime that kind of, it took my growing interest in music and technology and really kind of like pushed it forward. And it was just like a really important device in my life. So the iPod Mini means a lot to me.
Yeah, and I saw the same back in my high school years when this device started to gain traction, and I was so jealous of people who could afford an iPod, and I had one of those ugly and clunky MP3 players that copied essentially the original iPod. I had one from Acer, and I was so jealous of the people with the iPod, and I wanted to use the iPod, and I guess the iPod, and especially the iPod Mini, kind of started the revolution, I guess, of having music always with you, and I remember it clearly, the act of sharing an iPod and sharing your headphones with somebody else. For instance, I remember when maybe we had a school trip to, I don't know, we went to visit museums or other cities, and while on the bus, we would share headphones and actually earphones, and it was so new to me because I was used to CD players, and then I was used to my big and ugly MP3 player, and the iPod Mini was just it was just cool, you know. It was fresh, and it was a fashion statement, like you said, Mike, and it was like for me, the moment. The turning point would be the iPod Nano a few years later, not the Mini. But I remember when I first saw the iPod Mini, and I was like, I want that. And so, yeah, it was just a massive change, you know?
Yeah, the iPod Mini sold on the sex appeal, that it was, like you said, it was a fashion item. I mean, it's the whole reason they did colors. And I remember, for me at least, just sort of kind of as a, Apple watcher, like, I didn't see a lot of like regular iPods. They call them the white iPod, like the full size iPod. But out and about, I started seeing a lot of iPod Minis, and then it just really took off from there, especially with the Nano. But the iPod Mini also introduced some technology. It introduced the click wheel as we know it today, where if you kind of view as the middle of the button raised a little bit, it pivots down so you can hit menu or fast forward or back. The button kind of pivots, and it made it really easy for one-handed use. And Apple kind of, I think, viewed the iPod Mini as like the iPod that you could work out with. So you saw a lot of people running with it, people biking with it. You saw it in the gym a lot, and that one-handed use was really important. And that click wheel, until today, still on the Classic, still basically the same technology. They had an armband and everything. And again, this was a This was a fashion accessory. I think this lays the groundwork for future iPods like the Nano.
So it came with a belt clip, the iPod Mini, and and I remember clipping mine to my belt, so it was on show, and that was a thing. Like you wanted to show it off. You're like, yeah, I have an iPod Mini. Like you would show it off, and that was again like it seemed to be something that people did. You clip it to the belt. And I actually would wear a belt. I wasn't wearing a belt until I got an iPod Mini. I started buying belts to clip my iPods to. It was a big thing for me.
I remember seeing on an Italian magazine once a cover story about the iPod Mini, and I remember the article saying that the iPod Mini was the new hot accessory, and because all celebrities were using an iPod, and they were showing all these gold and pink iPod Minis, and I just remember the article because now that I write about Apple for a living, and now that we're talking about Beats music and Beats and fashion, it just seems to come back. From 10 years ago, this kind of change in Apple to wanting to address a larger market, not just the nerds, but normal people with a taste and attention to fashion trends and to celebrities and what famous people do or buy. And the iPod Mini is, I guess, a turning point for that.
So I want to take a moment to thank our third sponsor for this week's episode before we then dive into the iPod Nano, and that is Squarespace. They are the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, and online store. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com and enter the offer code WORLD at checkout. A better web starts with your website. And that all starts with Squarespace. Squarespace have their beautiful award-winning templates that you can choose from. But custom CSS can be applied to any template and any of their designs through their built-in custom CSS editor, which also provides image and font file storage for CSS assets. They feature Typekit and Google Fonts right out of the box, allowing you to select a truly beautiful typeface for your website or blog. They do some really amazing stuff with images too. This is something that we don't focus too much on about Squarespace, but I was playing around with this recently and I wanted to tell you about it. They have a really powerful editor built right in, powered by Aviary, which is allowing you to really simply and easily edit your photos. They have progressive image loading built right into their sites, so which basically what this does is it ensures that images at the top of a page load faster for your visitors, making your site seem even more responsive and more snappy. So images that are like below the fold and down further on the page, they load later on. So it's constantly loading. It's pretty cool. Squarespace also store multiple sizes of your images, and they do this all on their end. You don't pay anything for this. It's all included, and they ensure that the correct version of an image is then loaded dependent on the screen size and resolution. So they're making sure that your site always loads quickly. They make using third-party applications and third-party services like Typekit, Google Analytics, and Disqus really easy. If all you have to do is you just enter your user ID and Squarespace takes care of the rest. And you do this all in the settings pane in Squarespace. If you want to dig into the code of any Squarespace site, you can do that really easily. You can inject custom code into your site's header or footer on a per-page basis. You can get under the hood. They even build and take care of all feed redirects and 301, 302 redirects. All that sort of stuff is easily built in and easily supported. Squarespace think of everything, and they do all of this built on a rock-solid hosting platform with 24/7 support, iPhone and iPad apps, built-in analytics, and so much more. Squarespace plans start at $8 a month and include a free domain name if you sign up for a year. They feature responsive web design and even Squarespace Commerce, which is their online store functionality. Every single site comes with the ability to add a store. You can start a free trial right now with no credit card required and build your website today. When you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure that you use the offer code WORLD, that's WORLD. It's going to get you 10% off your first purchase and show your support for Connected. We thank Squarespace so much for their support of Connected and helping to get Relay FM off the ground. As Squarespace, a better web starts with your website. So the iPod Nano, introduced in 2005. By this point, you can kind of see the shift. So there's a big shift from the iPod Mini to the iPod Nano. So it's only a couple of years. But basically, Jobs starts by saying that the Mini is now the most popular MP3 player in the world. So this is like, what was it, like 1 or 2 years later?
It was less than 2 years later.
Yep.
So it's kind of incredible to see that change. And then he kind of goes on saying something which I think is really cool.
Well, today we're going to do something pretty bold. Today we're going to replace it.
I think that's such an awesome, like really like heavy thing to do.
It's, to a degree, it's sort of Apple at this point. They're kind of on top of their game, and they know that they can basically do what they want with the iPod, and as long as it's new and better, it will be successful. And I think the Nano was a marked improvement over the Mini. He talks about 1,000 songs in your pocket, and then he goes to reveal the Nano itself, and it's so genius. We just wanted to play this clip where he shows it to the crowd for the first time.
So, let's get a camera. I've got a pocket right here. Now, this pocket's been the one that your iPod's gone in, traditionally. The iPod and the iPod Mini fit great in there. You ever wonder what this pocket's for? I've always wondered that. Well, now we know, because this is the new iPod Mini.
So I loved watching these videos back to back because you can see the confidence of Apple and of Steve Jobs growing with each keynote. And there's the first iPod keynote, which is kind of subdued, and there's a small audience. And now there's the perfectly timed joke, or this big reveal for the Nano, for the front pocket. And it's just, you can see the company changing with the keynotes, and you can see the iPod growing, and by reflection, Apple growing as a company, which is now a much, much more mainstream company.
Yeah. And it's confidence, and it's showmanship. They get flashier with these things. They started in town hall with like a projector, and now Jobs is pulling a tiny iPod out of like the little tiny little pocket in your jeans.
Where is this? Is it like Macworld or something?
This is
I guess it's here, but when I went,
well, September 2000. So September was their music event. So yeah, probably the conference center in San Francisco.
That's a special event.
Yeah. In the fall, so like 2004, 2005, like all the way to like 2007 or 2008, maybe even 2009. Apple did a September or sometimes October music event,
right,
where they would do all these iPods. And so it kind of became an annual thing. And the showmanship, like I said, just gets better. And even here in 2005, they harkened back to 2001 and say 1,000 songs in your pocket, impossibly small. It's that confidence of, what we said 4 years ago, still true, and we can improve on it and continue to stay on message for 4 years. And it was impossibly small. I remember seeing this, Federico, your notes mirror mine. The first time I saw a Nano, I was shocked at how small something like this could be.
Yeah, the iPod Mini, I saw the iPod Mini at school, and I know that I wanted that. And then a couple of years passed, and I got used to my ugly Acer MP3 player. I didn't pay much attention to Apple or to the iPod in general. I just knew that there was this iPod thing in the world, and people were buying iPods, and I didn't have the money to buy an iPod. And then in 2007, I was in Benicassim in Spain at a music festival, and a friend of mine let me use his iPod Nano for a full afternoon because it was I guess it was at the beach, and I just wanted to rest and listen to some music before it was before an Albert Hammond Jr. concert, and I needed to listen to his first album. So he gave me his iPod Nano, and I was just, my mind was blown by the portability of the device and the fact that it had like dozens of albums and so many songs, and it was just so tiny and light. And from that moment, I was like, okay, I remember that Apple was cool and that I wanted an iPod Mini, but this iPod Nano thing that I'm trying is just amazing. So when I came back, I knew that I wanted an iPod, but I eventually bought an iPod Classic because I wanted more storage, and I was still amazed by, and it wasn't just the device in itself. that it was small and light. It was the combination of the hardware and the lightness and the software. It was so easy to use, and for me, a huge selling point was the color screen, that I could see album artwork, because I was used to this ugly and pixelated LCD display, which was, black and white. And for me, being able to see the artwork was huge selling factor.
Yeah, and that is something they had introduced in the iPod Photo, I think the same year, which is another. If we had an additional 5 hours, I think the iPod Photo would have made the cut to talk about. But it definitely brought that display and that sort of richness downstream to the more affordable device. And it's interesting to see like the software features they talk about. So there's like photo support, there's a world clock, a calendar. The stopwatch I still think was a brilliant addition, because if the Mini was made for running, the Nano definitely was. And I think a lot of people worked out with it. And so to be able to like run laps or, time somebody else doing something was like a very common use case for how people use the iPod Nano. And so just to have it right there on the device was a really, really good addition.
I like that Steve is kind of like going through this graveyard of competing devices when he's comparing how small the Nano is to other things, and he shows like the iRiver, the Creative Zen Player, and then at one point he shows off the Razr and calls it the coolest phone, until he remembers that the iTunes phone was announced in the keynote too, which I think is hilarious.
This is the coolest phone on the market until today with the iTunes phone.
If you don't know anything about the iTunes phone, there's a link to 512 Pixels. I wrote a thing in 2009 about it. That is a crazy device. Like, I don't know what they were thinking.
It felt like they had to make a deal for something else and did this as well.
Yeah, like, fine. You can put 100 iTunes songs on a phone.
It felt like, I mean, when I think back, I'm like, maybe Singular are involved in some way, and they wanted to try and get friendly for the iPhone. It just seems so weird. Like, there was so many things wrong with that product.
Yeah, it's pretty odd. So the nerd stuff, I'll cover my end of it here. No FireWire support. They said they had to drop it for thickness because the chipset was too big. So it was USB 2. It was also it came in black, which is really cool. It was not the first iPod to come in black. The U2 iPod, which there's some show note links to some things about the U2 iPod, which is just awful looking. It's so bad. Was black, but the Nano really looked cool in black until, unfortunately, this first generation Nano, like, they all got scratched up really badly, and some of them like exploded or caught fire, so there was a recall. Like, it kind of had some quality issues, but it's first gen Apple hardware. What do you expect?
They scratched up, man. Whew.
Yeah,
that was bad. Like, they were rough. Really beautiful, but the backs of those Nanos scratched up really bad.
Yeah.
So, guys, I have a good news for you. I remembered a few details about the Motorola iTunes phone.
Oh, thank you.
So I dug up an article that I remember from Wired from a couple of years ago, and it's gonna be in the show notes. And there's the backstory of the Motorola deal with the Razr phone. Basically, they couldn't get many details right, and essentially they had to release this phone because the deal was done. Steve Jobs was not happy about the phone, and you can read more in the article, which is called How the iPhone Blew Up the Wireless Industry.
What's really impressive is Apple sold 1 million of these in 17 days. They had an event, I guess a month later. Actually, the event I think that I just watched with the iMac, 17 days to sell 1 million devices was really quick at the time. And I think it really speaks to just the sort of overall likability of the Nano, that it was portable, it was cheap, it was basically invincible unless you scratched it. Just that it was a really popular device. And I think even more so than the Mini, the Nano to me at least, is the gateway to the modern era of devices from Apple. That it's solid state, it has a really nice screen. It's really gorgeous. Like both the white and the black, those original Nanos really look good. A lot of the subsequent Nanos look good. They're on like 7th or 8th generation Nano now, and for the most part, they're all really attractive. And so this is sort of the Apple's entrance into, if the Mini was dabbing their toe in the fashion waters, the Nano, for sure, especially when they went and back and added colors in the 2nd gen, was definitely a fashion accessory.
I forgot the Nano existed still.
The Nano has always been the device that Apple used to experiment with stuff. Because I remember when they did the kind of watch-like Nano, which was
the 6th gen.
It was pretty popular with my friends. I had a normal friend of mine who was using the iPod Nano as a watch.
That was a terrible idea.
Yeah, I know, but it was kind of cool, because it was at the moment when Apple was a big company, so using an iPod as a watch, it wasn't so weird after all. And I mean, it looks better than most smart watches today.
I disagree with that. Vehemently disagree with that.
I knew that.
Because that's just wrong.
The iPod Nano as a watch looks better than the Moto 360.
Oh, Federico, you're just trying to upset me? I can't believe that you think that.
Boys, simmer down. It's the first week back together.
No.
Don't kill each other yet.
He's trying to upset me.
I reviewed the iPod Nano as a watch. I agree that it's kind of terrible as a watch. Now, 3 years later, sort of ashamed of my headline on 512 pixels, but I will let it stand. But yeah, the Nano did change a lot. They had tall versions. They added a video camera at one point, which is incredibly stupid. They had a little short, squatty version. I think they changed it to keep it new, to keep it fresh. If your sibling got a new Nano for Christmas and it looked different than yours, you had envy. And at $149, it's sort of a impulse purchase for a lot of people to go out and upgrade to the new Nano. So it's brilliant, and that's what's impressed me in watching all these keynotes, within the span of a couple days, that Apple knows what they're doing. Like, the way the iPod family has evolved over time is not accidental. It is methodical. And I think our next device that we're getting ready to get into, the iPod Touch, is maybe the prime example of that, of Apple growing in a very specific direction with very specific features to land a very specific market.
So the iPhone has been released in the summer in the United States. And now people know what Apple has been working on when it comes to the phone and the touch interface. So there's a September event, and Steve Jobs is unveiling the new the future of the iPod, and he's talking about how to date they have sold over 100 million iPods, and he's showing a graph with the iPod sales to date. The iPod market is still growing. And so he's talking about the future of the iPod, and he's talking about the popularity of the iPod Nano. And he says that the iPod Nano is the most popular music player in the world and in history. And I was watching the video, and you can tell that Steve Jobs was really a fan of CoverFlow, because at every occasion that he has to show off CoverFlow and how it's beautiful to scroll through your albums, it just seems so happy. And it's kind of sad that CoverFlow is basically gone from everything.
Who used it? Other than a demo, did anybody ever use CoverFlow?
I guess it was just cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was a cool little demo thing you could do. Be like, hey, look what this does. Oh wow, it's all my album artwork. Never use it again, because it's a bad way to choose music.
Yeah, it's super slow, and they should have been called Cover Slow. Anyway. So anyway, Jobs is talking about, and Stephen, I saw your notes and you had this thought as well. Jobs is talking about the iPhone, and he goes, well, the iPhone is the best iPod. But today we're announcing the iPod Touch, which is also similar to the iPhone, but it's still an iPod. And the audience goes crazy, basically. and it's kind of strange because this is closer to us in terms of modern history. We know that the iPod Touch has always kind of been like the fake iPhone in a way, in a good way, right? It's because it's like the iPhone, but not really an iPhone. And so the iPhone announcement, we got the big reveal with the phone, the iPod, and the internet communications device. It's the best iPod ever, but we still thought that we wanted to do an iPod with the same features, but less. And it's kind of weird.
It is weird. And I think I can appreciate it from Apple's perspective that the iPod was so incredibly successful. And at this point, the iPhone's only been out for a couple of months. And the first iPhone wasn't a huge barn burner at first. It took a little while to reach iPod status. And of course, now it's just gone crazy. And so I can kind of see Apple's hesitancy to say, put the iPhone branding, the iPhone OS branding, even like we'll get into this, but Steve doesn't really like talk about the iPhone OS any. He talks about like we have Safari for iPod Touch and it's part of the iPod. It's like, well, that's not really true. That software is basically identical to the phone. But I can see Apple just sort of like holding on to the iPod name as long as possible because it was so popular and so successful.
Well, and I guess we can also see how, even if they don't mention the iPhone OS specifically, you can see how Apple is starting to diversificate the offer by putting iPhone OS on multiple devices, which would be a few years later, we would have the iOS on the phone, on the iPod, on the iPad, and even on the Apple TV, even if it's not publicly advertised as iOS and iPhone OS before. And I guess you can see that there's the event for the iPod Touch is, of course, less epic than the iPhone one because it's not so new anymore. But Stephen is still kind of showing off the interface and explaining how the interface works, which is kind of strange to look back because that there had been the big iPhone keynote, and that people were used to the interface, and now we are very much used to the interface. But still, it seems like people still needed some kind of explanation, or maybe it's just that Steve Jobs wanted to demonstrate how the iPhone could be. The software could be available on an iPod, because the big theme of this event is that it's trying to send a message that everything that is possible on an iPhone, which was the future, right? Thanks to Apple's design team, is now possible on a music player too. So the big theme is that your music player is now a portable computer. Your music player is now kind of like an iPhone. And that's a recurring theme throughout the whole keynote.
Yeah, he demoed Safari as a new product, even though he had demoed it for the iPhone months before. But again, there's some genius to his keynote. They keep showing, if you watch the video, they keep showing slides of the iPod Touch, and there's icons missing on the home screen. So one is Safari. They fill that in. We see Safari. Actually demos the New York Times website, which he does on the iPhone keynote as well as the iPad keynote a couple years later, which is interesting. And then they reveal YouTube, which a guy like, I think Fist Pump Guy, his grandfather is here. He like screams about free videos to watch, which is really funny.
We didn't want to stop there, though, because we love entertainment. And so what better way to provide even more entertainment than millions of free videos on YouTube? So we're building YouTube in.
Millions of free videos. It's just, because it's so new, right? It's millions of free videos. You don't have to pay.
The YouTube app was already on the iPhone. It was just, hey, this is, like you said, Federico, you said it really well. It's much better than how I was thinking about it, is that your music player can now do this. It's not an iOS device. It's a music player that does all these cool things.
Yeah, because the concept of iOS device doesn't exist at this point, really.
Yeah.
Right. And then something truly new, the iTunes Wi-Fi music store, which the name itself implies some of the limitations that it didn't work. Well, the iPod Touch only had Wi-Fi, and like they make a big reveal about the the antenna, like the Wi-Fi antenna on the back of it. But Wi-Fi only downloads, but downloads of music. And I remember when this first showed up, like I bought some music this way, like at work, like, you know, hey, it's a Tuesday at the Apple store and a new album is out, and you can just download it right to your device and then sync it back to iTunes. And you know, now in a world where I can download or stream anything to any device anywhere, like this is the beginning of that, and really only 7 years ago, which is nuts, but a pretty big breakthrough. And one that would prove to be increasingly important as iTunes on the desktop has become more irrelevant and people are experiencing media more and more on a device that fits in their pocket.
Two of my favorite moments in this keynote are when Steve Jobs says customer sat.
You know, the surveys are in, and the customer satisfaction numbers on the iPhone are off the charts. The customer sat numbers are higher.
So we know that it's not just a Tim Cook thing.
Oh.
And the second one, possibly better, is this is before the App Store, right? This is 2007.
Yep.
And when he's showing off Safari, and he says, I want to show you a really cool app that Facebook wrote.
And so here's all my friends in Facebook, and I can go into any of those, and I've got an inbox right here.
And it's not an app, it's the Facebook website, of course. It's the mobile web app. And it's just so, like, happy to show off how Facebook, this cool new social network that people are using, they have an app for the iPhone and of course for the iPod Touch, because now you can use apps on your music player on the web through Wi-Fi. Because another big theme of this event is that Steve is unhappy about Wi-Fi login pages. So and he says we built Safari, so Wi-Fi is not useless anymore. When you get a login page, your music player has a browser and you can fill in the credentials. And he was particularly upset about Stanford University putting a login page on their Wi-Fi network.
He hates Stanford.
The thing that really got me was even walking through Stanford University to use their Wi-Fi network. You're given a web page and you have to log in with that web page. If you can't do that, you can't get on most Wi-Fi networks outside of your home and office.
To Steve's credit, I will say the Wi-Fi at our local hospital is at St. Jude is really crummy on iOS. Like even today, like you go and join the wireless network, and then now thankfully iOS 7 and higher remembers the password, but like it's like. And occasionally it just like throws it back up. Like I'm in Tweetbot and then like Tweetbot crashes and I have to go to Safari and I have to sign back into the Wi-Fi page. It's terrible.
It's so strange to remember a time where Wi-Fi was a privilege and now it's kind of obvious for us.
But my issue with the whole demo is like that's a very chicken and egg problem. Like if you don't have Safari, like who cares if you don't have Wi-Fi? I guess to have the store, but I don't know. It's sort of funny.
Yeah, that is a good point. It's not a problem, is it? Like, it's not a problem unless you have a web browser. I get what you're saying. It is very chicken and egg. It's like, well, we don't need it there unless there's a web browser there. Yeah, I get you. But he is saying like people are trying to start to implement it and failing, and it's because there's no keyboards and anyway. Yeah, but I get what you're saying. It's quite interesting.
And of course the one of the last announcements is that the iPod Touch is going to be the first touchscreen device that Apple is going to ship outside the US. And
that's big.
Yeah, that's big because after the iPod Classic, the iPod Touch was my first, I guess, iPhone OS device.
Same here. I was able to get a Touch before the iPhone was available.
Yep, same. Well, actually, there's a funny story about my former boss buying an original iPhone and then basically forcing me to buy it because he didn't know how to use it. But
I think you told that on the iPhone.
Yeah, that's another story.
Yeah. Interesting. And the Touch today, Apple doesn't break out sales numbers, but I think the iPod Touch today is still a pretty important product. I would imagine that it's the best-selling iPod. And it's sort of a big deal because it's with kids and even in the classroom, like there's some iPod Touch 1-to-1s floating around. The iPad has offset a lot of that. But I think the iPod Touch is still an relatively important product to Apple. And in a second, we're going to talk about the last dates that iPods were updated. And the iPod Touch is the most recent and the most frequently updated. And I think that speaks to its importance because it is a full-fledged iOS device. And even though it doesn't have an LTE option, which I would love an iPod Touch that you could buy with LTE like an iPad.
Well, the iPad is just a big iPod Touch, so
yeah, it's fine. You can't do real work on an iPad.
yeah.
You can on an iPod though.
Yes, that click wheel really makes it easy to scroll through your contacts and look up someone's phone number.
You also can on smartwatches, but anyway.
That's what I've told.
To close that off, Mike, tell us about our awesome friends at the Omni Group.
I will do that. Omni Group are our final sponsor for this week's episode, and we love them very dearly. And I would like to today talk a little bit about OmniFocus. So, very recently, the Omni Group have released the OmniFocus 2 for the Mac. It features a brand new design that feels right at home after you've used OmniFocus 2 for iPhone. And if you don't mind me saying, Omni Group is going to feel right at home on Yosemite as well. I feel it feels very nicely in that interface. There's a new standard version of OmniFocus with a cheaper price of just $40. This allows you to get a handle on all of your projects and gives you all of the features you're going to need to stay productive. You can easily sync with OmniFocus for iPhone and iPad with Omni's own free sync server, allowing you to stay in control no matter where you are. You can take advantage of OmniFocus 2's incredible forecast view to get a quick glimpse of your day, week, or month. You can easily see all of your tasks and appointments in one screen, allowing you to effectively plan out your day. Personally, I live in forecast mode on my Mac and on my iPhone. I think right now I probably couldn't live without it. It really, really helps me plan out how my days are going to go and work out where my projects are. OmniFocus 2 for Mac also features a slick review mode, which allows you to quickly check out the status of all of your projects so you can, in one glance and in one view, so you can easily see how you're progressing. If you want to really dig into OmniFocus, and once you do, you're really going to wonder how you got by without it. You're going to want to live in this application. And they also have a pro version of OmniFocus 2, which offers some additional fantastic features like AppleScript and custom perspectives. And don't forget, OmniFocus 2 for iPad should launch alongside iOS 8 to really complete this fantastic and beautiful suite of applications. There is currently a version of OmniFocus 2 for the iPad out, for OmniFocus for the iPad out, but OmniFocus 2 is coming with iOS 8. If you want to find out more about OmniFocus, go to omnigroup.com/OmniFocus. OmniFocus 2 is available directly from the Omni Group's website or the Mac App Store. So that's OmniFocus from the Omni Group. Your life in perspective.
I was so excited when they were going to help us get Relay going. It's such an excellent app. I mean, I live in OmniFocus. I can't imagine doing my job without it. It's critical to everything I do.
I love them. Thank you.
What's not so critical to Apple, at least, seems to be the iPod these days.
Especially the classic.
Oh God! So listen to these dates. Okay, so this is these are the dates that the various iPod models were last updated. The iPod Shuffle, which we didn't even talk about, has no display. Its whole thing was like life is random and play music randomly. You can sync things to it and play in order as well. Last updated in September of 2010. So 4 years ago.
Seriously? Man.
Yep. The Nano, which it went from the watch face that we talked about to, they sort of went back to a candy bar, but it's a touchscreen and looks like iOS but has round icons. It's very strange. I own one of those iPod Nanos and I gave it to my brother. I was like, forget it, I'm done.
The start of spite.
Yeah. So, well, I don't like touch devices that I exercise with. I want it. Anyways, September 2012, so 2 years ago. The iPod Classic. Now, this date of September 2009, which is 5 years ago, is a little bit incorrect because they have tweaked the hard drive sizes over time. They had two models and they just went back to one model. It's just one model now. But more or less the same since September 2009. And the iPod Touch, again, an iOS device, technically last updated just in June, but really the year before. This year in June, they used to have 2 models of iPod Touch, and then they consolidated them. It still runs. Federico, correct me if I'm wrong. The iPod Touch still has an A5 processor in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Sure.
lower res camera. You're that. Look at me. I do work on iOS. It has an A5 processor in it. Older iOS device, but even then, not updated as often or as frequently as the iPhone. Definitely not as powerful as the iPhone.
I do have the iPod Touch. You know why? Because it's the device I use for the betas.
Yeah, it's just Mike. Mike, you have one.
Yep.
I actually shipped it to you from Tennessee to London, and it was not super fun. Anyways,
That was
so
it.
it's a very. Did you just hit your iPod Touch on your mic?
Yes.
So Federico, you're going to walk us through the sales numbers, and it's very clear that, to me at least, I think this is somewhat of a cycle that yes, the iPod is becoming less popular because of the iPhone and because of streaming music services and because of 100 different reasons. But as they've become less popular, Apple has sold less of them, so they update them less frequently, so they sell less of them, so they update less frequently. But these numbers, and we have a chart from a website called Mac Stories.
I hate that website.
It should be responsive. You should do responsive design.
Yeah, I know.
Wait, what year is this? So walk us through this. How's the iPod doing?
It's a slow death, basically. I was looking at the numbers from the last quarter from July. And basically, the iPod represents 1% of the company revenue, and to date, Apple has sold just shy of 400 million units. To be precise, 394 million iPods sold to date. From I don't have the breakdowns for individual lines of iPod, but still, the iPhone has sold more units, by the way. And so you can see, especially if you look at the last 12 quarters, you can see starting from the holiday quarter from 2011, you can see this basically the iPod's decline just becomes clear because you can see the holiday quarters started to see sales cut in half between 2013 and 2014.
Wow.
And then each quarter, basically the iPod has now settled below the 3 million units sold each quarter. It used to be almost 8 million units per quarter, and now it's less than half. So obviously, like you said, Stephen, it's a problem of Apple not caring much about the iPod, so people can see that, and people don't buy new iPods because there are no new iPods. But also, I guess the bigger problem is that the iPod is now a feature. The iPod and the idea of playing music, listening to music, and is now an app, whether it's the music app or whether it's Spotify or Audio or Beats Music, which Apple bought. Listening to music is not a product. It's become a feature. It's become something so obvious that it can be an app that you download, or it can be iTunes still if you're subscribed to iTunes Match, or if you still like to sync music locally. But clearly, the future is something like Beats Music or something like iTunes Radio. And of course, there are still Apple is still making iPods, as you said, as you noted, Stephen, with the dates. The iPod Classic, which is the traditional, the classic iPod, was updated 5 years ago, and so I was thinking about the iPod, and I was thinking about the evolution of the iPod, and I kind of wanted to talk about the impact of the iPod through history and the kind of change that the iPod brought. So what started as a breakthrough product has, in my opinion, become a feature. But in becoming a feature, the iPod has left us with a message, I think. And the message and the importance of the iPod is that in creating a portable device focused on a single feature, Apple didn't just focus on the specifications of the device, didn't just focus on the hardware, because it was, because it was new hardware. They didn't just market a click wheel. They sold it like a way of life, I think. If you care about music, if you love about music, we're not just giving you a cool piece of hardware. We're giving you a life companion. We're giving you a pod, an extension of yourself, an extension of your habits. And if you're a music listener, if you love music, you're going to want the iPod, not because it's got the super fast hard drive, not because our headphones are the best, and not because we have the best LCD displays, but because we're giving you a lifestyle, and because the iPod is the best way to listen to music. And we can see that through history, other companies have copied this approach. And if you look at MP3 players before the iPod and after the iPod, you're going to see basically the same image on Google search if you search for smartphones before the iPhone and after the iPhone.
Yeah.
And the same is true if you look for headphones before Beats and after Beats. These are products that maybe with time they become obvious and maybe with time they become features, but they do leave a lasting appeal and a lasting message. And the appeal of the iPod is that, especially in light of Apple making, or at least being rumored to make, a wearable device, if you don't care about fashion in the sense of how people are going to integrate the device in their daily lives, if you just focus on the tech without caring about the human part and the lifestyle part, you're gonna miss on a big opportunity. And I think that's the big message of the iPod.
Yeah, and I think, you guys make fun that I'm an old man, but I think our generation is particularly suited to appreciate the iPod. That for me and for you guys, I was in high school when the iPod came out. I got my first one of the third gen as a kind of a graduation present. We were the right age where music was very influential. It's very influential on most people in their teens and early 20s, and it connected with us in a way that, for me at least, computers really didn't. And computers connected with me more than most people. But the fact that I could have an iPod, I could have all my music on it, that my music was part of my identity. And, it was a very personal thing to hand somebody your iPod and let them scroll through it. It still is. It still is to a degree. Like, it's weird, like, if you see someone's shared iTunes library or an audio playlist or a Spotify library, like, the music you listen to is a very personal thing. And the iPod made it even more so that you could just be cocooned with your music, with your iPod, with your earbuds, and have an experience alone was very powerful, and one that to this day still resonates with me. I still listen to my iPod as I fall asleep some nights. And it made what the iPod did more than any other device that I can think of is that it made technology personal. That, yes, and we've talked about it, that computers went from mainframes to laptops, and in that, the personal computer became personal. And that's absolutely true. But with the iPod, it feels different. It feels like something that is an extension of you. And smartphones have just ridden that train further, that if it was weird to hand over your iPod to your girlfriend to flip through music, it's even odder to hand somebody your phone, because your phone says so much more about you. And is a wearable going to say even more? Probably. And I just think that Apple tapped into that, and the three of us, at least, being in our mid to late 20s, like, we were the perfect age. We were right there. And I think that's why this is such an important thing to us.
And it's worth mentioning as well, like, because I think that it gets the names and the words have got abstracted over time. Podcasts come from the iPod. Like, that's where that name comes from, because it was a way of getting these sort of like on-demand audio broadcasts onto your iPod. Like, there was an app, like one of the first apps was called Lemon Podder, if I'm remembering correctly, before Apple then integrated podcasts into iTunes, and it was because it was a way to get these sort of broadcasts onto your iPod. And I mean, I remember installing all the software needed to do that, and I remember watching video podcasts on my video iPod and syncing. I remember, waking up early on a Wednesday morning so I could sync MacBreak Weekly onto my iPod before I left for school or for work or whatever. And for me, like the iPod was as important for podcasts as it was for music, and it enabled me to fall in love with that medium as well. So that this product is such an interesting thing, and I want to ask you both one final question before we wrap up today. And I'll start with you, Stephen. Is there anything left in this product category
of portable music player?
iPod.
I mean, I think to a degree, I think of all the iPods that are left today, I think the Classic still exists for people like me who do want all their music with them, and the Nano and Shuffle still exist for people who work out. But I think we are becoming increasingly marginalized, and I think that if we look back in another 5 years, they're going to be gone. I think that the iPod is very near to the end of its life, and I'm honestly surprised that there's still 4 models. I really would have guessed that by now the Classic at least would have gone away, or that the Shuffle would go away. I think the Nano will probably, if I were to go out on a limb, would say will survive the longest, besides the iPod Touch. So there's definitely nothing outside of Apple that's worth talking about. And even within Apple, the conversation is becoming shorter and shorter.
What about you, Federico? What do you think?
Well, I don't think there's much of a future for the iPod as a dedicated music device. I don't see Apple getting into the high fidelity audio playback. I'm thinking of the device that I guess Neil Young wants to sell, about trying to play back music with the highest quality on a portable device. Honestly, most of the stuff that the iPod could do, now you can do on an iPhone or on a tablet. And even the addition of apps and games, now you have those on your phone. So I do believe that the iPod as a device as a product that you buy and that you keep with you, that's going away. Especially if Apple is really building this wearable device for people who work out. That could be a solution and a replacement to the iPod Shuffle and Nano. But the iPod as a vision, the iPod as an idea, right? The importance of music in our daily lives, more than movies and books, because movies and books are something that you have to consume actively, right? You have to sit down and watch a movie or read a book. Music is something that keeps you company when you're doing something else. So wanting to give a market to music, I don't think that's going away. And I do believe that Apple's focus on music can be seen in the acquisition of Beats Music, and the love, the passion for giving people better music. That will be around, whether it's the Beats headphones or whether it's the Beats Music app, or the integration with iTunes Radio and curation for better music. So the iPod as a product may be dead, or at least dead soon enough. The iPod as an idea and as a philosophy, as a way for Apple to care about music, I think that's going to stay.
Thank you, Federico, and thank you all for listening to episode 1 of Connected. It has been an absolute pleasure recording this episode. I hope that you have all enjoyed listening to it as much as we have creating it. I'm so pleased that we're back in action now on our new home, which is at relay.fm. If you'd like to find the show notes for this week's episode, go to relay.fm/connected/1. We are at _connectedfm on Twitter. I am at iMyke. Federico is at Vitici, and Stephen is at ISMH. We would like to thank a specific studio for helping Stephen out today. Stephen, would you like to just give your thanks to your very new fancy recording digs that you're in at the moment?
Yeah, so I'll be recording Connected out of Fuel Film. They're a studio here in Memphis. They're doing some really great stuff with video and nonprofits, and they've been kind enough to lend us their space every week for me to do the show. And so you can check them out, fuelfilm.org, and drop them a line if you'd like. They're really cool guys. They've been great to work with over the last month or so putting this together. So thank you to them.
That's why Stephen sounds so incredible this week. I think I have some work to do. Thank you all for listening, as I said, and we'll be back next week. This show will actually be streaming live in the future. So keep your eye. I know. Keep your eye on the site relay.fm and on the network's Twitter account, which is _relayfm, and we'll be tweeting out information about the show streaming live, and that will be most likely from next week's episode. So keep an eye out for that. That will be interesting.
Yeah, we'll see if all the work I've done works.
Yeah, we'll see. Until then, thank you so much, and we'll be back. Bye-bye.
Arrivederci.
Adios.
We're back.